Welcome. Today I'm just going to do a very brief moment for us together, but it's a very important topic, so we'll just try to keep it highly contained, and I hope it'll be something that you'll be able to give a lot of thought and prayer to, and again, it's one of those things that certainly we're going to have to be dealing with as we move forward. But the issue that I want to put on the table with you today is understanding the difference between church traditions and Christian tradition. Oftentimes the word tradition gets a bad rap because we lump everything that we've done in the past under the larger heading of tradition. You might be surprised to know that even the New Testament, the Apostle Paul mentions and recognizes this difference between traditions, which are oftentimes particular rituals or things that churches do. The difference between traditions, with an S on it, and the tradition of Christianity. So let's just start with the one that is comes first. That is the tradition of Christ. So in the early church, the tradition, Paul said to pass the tradition on. He was, talking about the story of Jesus. He was talking about the gospel of Jesus Christ. That, as simple as this might sound, that is the tradition that transcends time. That is the tradition that every generation needs to know. That is the legacy that we leave. That's what was given to us. That's what the community needs to hear. And so there is a tradition, but it is a tradition that in its simplest form is a tradition about Christ and his life and his message, the tradition of the gospel. That tradition, as you know, is non-negotiable for those of us who follow Christ. It's not one of those things that every time there's a changeover in leadership, or there's a new generation, or there's a new church, or whatever, it's not one of those things that churches have to get together and have a powwow about. That is the tradition that will never be gone. The tradition originates actually with the gospel itself and is the gospel. Traditions refers to all of the other things that we have done, or that they could be rituals, they could be programs, they could be habits, they could be structures, all of the things that we have done along the way to practice the tradition itself. So the tradition moves across time unchanged. Traditions usually last a very long time, hence the word tradition. But the traditions are things that from time to time or in a particular season may need to be changed. The tradition is an eternal thing that God has given us as a gift. Traditions are temporary ways that we express the gospel or live out our faith. So I know you see the difference, but here's what happens in most churches, or at least most that I kind of encounter. There is, or appears to be in a number of churches, a confusion between what is the tradition and what are the traditions. In other words, there is confusion about what is it that is unalterable? What is it that is unchanging? And what is it, or what are the things or the practices that are subject to change? In many churches, because both the tradition and traditions have been there for a very, very long time, they become confused, or they become so integrated that if you don't take time to think about and reflect on what's happening, the traditions begin to take on the nature of the tradition. And so over time, what happens is that churches who hold the tradition, that is, they certainly have and treasure the gospel of Jesus. So they've got that tradition. But over years or over generations, the way that that tradition has been expressed, or the many traditions that have come about to support the tradition, have been kind of mixed into the tradition itself in such a way that oftentimes it can be difficult to tease out or separate out the difference between the tradition and the traditions. And sometimes they are so closely or tightly embedded with each other that we feel like if we start addressing the traditions that we hold, that somehow that is to say that we are sacrificing the non-negotiable tradition. So the key to this is being able to, as church families, being able to clearly identify what is the tradition, what is it that has been passed to us, what is it that goes back to the beginning, to Christ himself, to the gospel, what is it clearly that is passed along through the generations, what is it clearly that we need to pass to the next generation, and make sure that we can identify what that is. Now the truth is that's fairly simple, and I think most of us have it. But what can be more challenging is identifying the traditions that we have had, whether they are very, very old traditions or whether they are even new traditions that have come about over the last decades or something like that. And so once we can identify that this is the tradition of the gospel, and all of these things we do, some of them we know quite clearly why we do them, and some things we might not even be sure why we do them. We just know that's traditionally what we do. And so we never examine it, we never question it, we never ask why do we do this, and should we be doing this, and should we eliminate this particular tradition so that we can do something else. Now here's the tricky thing about traditions, that is that once they are seen to be, or once a church takes the traditions and puts them at the level or gives them the same value as the tradition, it is almost impossible for churches to either let go or to reshape or to reform their traditions. And once that happens, it is further impossible for churches to hear what God is trying to say to them or where the Spirit is leading. This is particularly significant now that we've had the COVID thing, or having it, and that is the COVID gives everybody a chance to have this very important conversation. It gives everybody a chance to reset some things And resetting, the reset button can be very helpful because it allows us the opportunity to be very honest about what are some of the things that are helpful and meaningful, what are some of the traditions that still carry value, but at the same time, what are some of the things that are no longer helpful or meaningful, what are some of the traditions that no longer convey the value that they originally had. And once we can have clarity about traditions that need to continue or traditions that need to be gently eliminated, then we will have more clarity about what are the things that we can do as we press forward. So if churches grasp on too tightly to the traditions and they're not willing to let them go, then it's going to be very difficult for those churches to explore new things, to experiment, to discern together where they hear God's Spirit leading together, because the traditions will pretty much set the tone and set the pace and dictate what a church can or cannot do. So I hope that this will be, I know it's a shorter one today, but I hope that it will be helpful and that you will take time to explore, thoughtfully the difference between the tradition of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the traditions that churches observe. And every church has some, and every family has some. We have family traditions that we observe, and we love them. And so we just want to be able to, either in our mind or write down what those traditions are, and then ask very honest questions. God, are you still working in that particular tradition? If that tradition is one in which God is not working, but He did work years ago, we just give thanks for the years in which that was a way that God worked. And then we say, okay, God, we see that that particular whatever tradition or ritual or program or that particular way of doing things was effective then. It is not as an effective resource or tool for today. So we're going to lay that one aside, give thanks for it, and we're going to open ourselves up to how your Spirit is leading us in today's world, and how you're leading us as we kind of start looking toward the future and what that's going to look like and how challenging that's going to be given the reality of COVID. So this is a great time to just, you have to just spend time reflecting, spend thoughtful time, prayerful time, and I hope that you will kind of take some moments to look at traditions and then ask yourself, is this a tradition God wishes for us? Is the Spirit still working in? Or is this one that we need to let go? And then when we are able to have these kinds of discussions face to face, I'm sure we will be talking about the tradition of the gospel and then the many traditions that have come along with that through time. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will certainly look forward to when we can sit together in a room or around a table in a meal and have this conversation together. Thank you, and God bless you.